Tonight at 10, Yorkshire County Cricket Club is engulfed by the racism row, the biggest crisis in its history. The controversy over the club's response to the racist harassment experienced by former player Azim Rafiq has prompted its chairman to step down.
What I've seen is a culture that's locked in the past, a culture that finds it difficult to accept challenge and change.
Former England captain Michael Vaughan was accused of making a racist comment to players, something he denies. The BBC says he won't be presenting his cricket programme next week. Also on the programme tonight. Thousands of young climate activists marched through the streets of Glasgow outside COP26, led by the Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg.
They have had 26 COPs. They have had decades of blah, 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 and where has that led us?
The unarmed black jogger shot dead while out on a run in the United States. 3 white men go on trial accused of his murder. And we speak to the Hollyoaks actor, dropped by Channel 4 after she refused to remove photos of herself from an adult website.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel.
Good evening. The row over racism at Yorkshire, one of English cricket's most famous clubs, has intensified with the resignation of its chairman. The worst crisis in the club's history has been sparked by a year-long investigation that found former player Azim Rafiq had been the victim of racial harassment and bullying, but no disciplinary action was taken. Former England captain Michael Vaughan was one of those named in the investigation, accused of making a racist comment to a group of Asian players, something he strongly denies. The BBC says he won't present his 5 Live cricket programme next week. Here's our sports editor, Dan Roan.
The racism that cricketer Azim Rafiq suffered at Yorkshire has plunged the county into an unprecedented crisis. Today, as the fallout continued, the chairman bowed to intense pressure, and in his first interview after announcing his resignation, Roger Hutton told me the club had let their former player down.
I'm sorry that he didn't have his allegations investigated in 2018. I'm sorry that it's taken so long. I'm sorry that ultimately the club hasn't shown the right contrition. I've not personally met anyone that I would consider racist at the Yorkshire County Cricket Club. What I've seen is a culture that's locked in the past.
Amid more resignations at Headingley today, Hutton blamed senior management, who he said resisted change after a report found Rafiq had suffered racial harassment.
There was a failure by many within the club to accept its findings or understand them or recognise them. And since then that has been incredibly frustrating.
The England and Wales Cricket Board punished Yorkshire by banning Headingley from hosting England matches, but Hutton said it should have done more to support the investigation.
I heard a statement last night from the ECP that they repeatedly offered to help me and Yorkshire County Cricket Club through this investigation. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Yorkshire batsman Gary Ballance had admitted repeatedly using a racial slur towards Rafiq about his Pakistani heritage, but a panel regarded it as friendly banter, and no action's been taken against any member of staff, sparking outrage.
Do you accept that conclusion that they reached,
well,
that it was friendly banter? Is that how you would deem that expression, that phrase, towards a colleague?
If you use that language, it is completely unacceptable. But
so why was there no action taken?
Because you haven't seen the context of the whole of the report, and the club had legal advice that actually that was not something that you could take disciplinary action in relation to.
Is Ballance the only current member of staff that there's been an allegation upheld against?
No.
Former England captain Michael Vaughan, meanwhile, has become the second player to reveal he's named in the report. Rafiq alleging he'd made a racist comment towards a group of Asian players in 2009. Vaughan denies the claim, but today one of those players said he'd heard the alleged comment. A prominent pundit, tonight he was stood down from his radio show. In a statement, the BBC said it takes any allegations of racism extremely seriously. The allegation against Michael Vaughan predates his time working for the BBC. We've made the editorial decision that Michael won't appear as a presenter on 5 Live's Tuffers and Vaughan's show on Monday. The show focuses on topical discussion around current cricketing matters, and given his personal involvement, we need to ensure we maintain the impartiality of the programme. This all comes at a time when cricket authorities are trying to make the sport more diverse, and some fear this damaging episode may send the game backwards.
It's more about trying to get systemic change in a club like Yorkshire, which change has proven to be very difficult, and the club, I think, has failed to evolve quick enough in the way that society is changing and our attitudes towards race and racism.
This has been a devastating week for the most successful club in county cricket, but the ramifications of this remarkable saga now extend well beyond Headingley.
And Dan is at Headingley tonight, and just expand on that. This has certainly engulfed Yorkshire, but how significant is it for the sport of cricket?
Well, Sophie, the way that things have imploded here, the speed at which it's unravelled at Yorkshire Cricket Club this week is like very little I've ever seen in sport. In the space of just, a few days, they have lost effectively all of their sponsors, their right to host lucrative England matches, their chairman's gone, half of the board have followed him. Two of their most high-profile players in recent years are facing serious allegations, and tonight more revelations. Their head coach, Andrew Gale, under investigation by both the ECB and Yorkshire for an alleged anti-Semitic tweet in 2010. The club has also had to launch another investigation into the claims of a second former Yorkshire player, Asian player, who says that he was subject to repeated racist bullying. But, this is about more than just Yorkshire. There are fears that this has exposed an ugly side to the game, a sense perhaps that it's at odds with trends in wider society, and that the ECB may have failed to tackle underrepresentation and a lack of diversity in the sport. On Monday, the new chairman will give a press conference here at Yorkshire. He has vowed to do whatever it takes to regain trust, but there's little doubt that after a week, the like of which cricket has rarely seen, he has a huge task on his hands.
Dan Rowan, thank you. The Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg has accused world leaders of deliberately postponing much-needed drastic action against global warming and said they were fighting instead to keep the status quo. Addressing thousands of young people at a rally in Glasgow, she called the COP26 climate summit little more than a celebration of business as usual. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
A rare opportunity for protesters to loudly deliver a message almost within earshot of the global decision makers gathered in Glasgow. Greta Thunberg, who inspired the Fridays for Future movement, says those leaders have so far failed to deliver. Young kids inspired by Greta have drawn their own pictures of her.
I know that she put out a sign and then everybody else started following her.
That's right. How do you talk to children this age about climate change without scaring them too much?
I don't have to tell them. They themselves are aware. They know about plastic, about pollution, about air pollution.
As the government announced measures to put climate at the heart of education, kids, mostly with their parents' permission, were skipping school to take part in this youth protest.
Your sign says now means now, not later. Why did you write that?
I wrote that because they're saying we need to do this now, we need to get this now, we're going to sort this now, but they're not sorting it. They're just going to make promises that they can't keep.
Do you think that's what the world leaders at COP are doing, making promises that you don't think they're going to keep?
Yes, this has happened a lot of times before. People say they're going to do things and they don't make enough change to actually have an impact.
Really hoping that the folk in COP sitting there drinking their tea are listening, and they're listening to what we have to say and trying to make a change.
Do you not think they're trying to achieve the same thing as you, to lower carbon emissions and try and save the planet?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they are trying, but we're trying harder.
So far at this COP, there have already been commitments to reverse deforestation, cut methane emissions and promise more money than ever before to tackle climate change.
Greta Thunberg, who's at the front, doesn't seem very impressed with the progress of COP so far. What do you think?
I think it's fair enough. It's COP26. I'm 26 years old. It's been 26 years. No progress has been made. Our carbon emission keeps increasing. We need action.
On stage, Ms. Thunberg dismissed COP26 as a PR exercise.
This is no longer a climate conference. This is now a Global North Greenwash Festival. A 2-week-long celebration of business as usual and blah, blah, blah. They cannot ignore the scientific consensus, and above all, they cannot ignore us, the people. including their own children.
Tomorrow, even larger crowds are expected, hoping to keep up the pressure before the final week of climate negotiations. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, the impact of climate change is already very real for villagers on an island in northern Alaska. They're being forced out of their homes because of rising sea levels. Alaska is home to rapidly retreating glaciers, where the rate of melting is among the fastest on the planet. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, is in Anchorage, Alaska's largest city. He joins us now. Justin.
Alaska is kind of like the canary in the mine of climate change. Because temperatures are so close to freezing, increase them just a little bit and you see very profound changes. So ice that used to be frozen or snow that fell and melted in the late spring or the summer is melting earlier. And that is having a profound effect here in Alaska, as I've been discovering. The top of our world is changing, warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, and it is destroying communities.
Yeah, my house, it used to be about 20 feet out where you see the water breaks.
The island of Shishmaref is on the front line of climate change. As temperatures rise, less sea ice forms, exposing the coast.
It's getting later and later every year for this ocean to freeze up. It's tough, but gotta keep going.
As the climate changes, the animals and fish the people here used to live on are getting harder to find.
Right now we're supposed to be fishing in the lagoon and up the rivers. Now we've got to wait till like December, probably January to start going up again.
Parts of the main road have washed away, and now the airstrip that is the community's lifeline to the outside world is threatened.
If it gets to the runway, then we can't use it anymore. We use the runway for medevacs, we use the runway for getting all our food flown in.
The plan is to move the entire town onto the mainland. It'll cost an estimated $180 million, but, says Dennis, they've got no choice.
The climate's changing so fast, and the storms are getting more violent, and the ice isn't forming, and the water is warming. I mean, I would say within the next 5-10 years, this will all be covered. Easy. Just that 1 or 2 degrees makes a big difference.
And Alaska isn't just struggling to cope with its new climate reality on the coast.
A century ago, the glacier came all the way down here. The entire valley was frozen. And as recently as the 80s, they built this visitor centre because you could still see the glacier in the valley. Since then, it has completely retreated around the corner and you can't see it at all.
We're almost around the corner. We should be able to see the glacier.
These days, if you want to see the ice, it is now a tough hike up and over a high pass. This is all that remains of the once mighty Portage Glacier. And mountain glaciers aren't just melting here in Alaska, they are melting all over the world, potentially affecting millions of people who depend on ice for their water supply.
If we didn't have glaciers, we're no longer going to have drinking water for cities. We might not have any hydropower potential, especially for agricultural needs. We would have water only maybe during the winter months and not during the summer months. During the dry periods, there would be no water.
Back in Shishmaref, Alfred is struggling to come to terms with the idea that his home will soon be gone.
Well, Shishmaref means a lot to me because it's got a lot of heritage, a lot of good people. While we're here, we just got to keep our tradition going. Just try to keep going strong.
It isn't easy to let go of the place where you've spent your entire life, but if greenhouse gas emissions aren't cut rapidly, it is something many millions more people are likely to have to face. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Alaska.
Well, it has been a busy week in Glasgow with some major announcements on tackling climate change. Our science editor, David Shookman, assesses the moves made so far and looks ahead at what is still to come.
Back at the start of the week, when the talks got going, things seemed pretty grim because nothing much was moving. But then came a flurry of promises. A push to cut methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, has caused maybe half of global warming so far. A plan to end deforestation by 2030 so that the trees continue to store carbon. And more cash for renewable energy as banks and big investors announced commitments to go green. So how does all this add up in terms of the likely outcomes for climate change? Well, one estimate is that if all these promises are kept, then the increase in the global temperature should be limited to 1.8 degrees Celsius. That's a lot better than earlier projections for a rise of 2.7, but it all depends on every country and every company keeping its word. And meanwhile, the UN estimates that emissions of the gases heating the planet are still set to rise by nearly 14% by 2030. So we're still heading in the wrong direction. So what happens now? Well, the talks continue throughout next week on a range of questions, including how often governments update their climate plans. At the moment, it's every 5 years, but given the urgency of the problem, many countries and scientists say that's not often enough. It should be every year. So there will be tough negotiations. There is a greater sense of momentum, but will it be translated into tangible action?
David Shookman there. The mother of a 15-year-old schoolboy who was shot and stabbed outside his home in Birmingham has said her heart is broken beyond repair after 5 teenagers were found guilty of killing him. Keon Lincoln was attacked by 4 of the youths who were convicted of murder, among them a 14-year-old boy who shot him. A 5th teenager was found guilty of manslaughter after supplying weapons used in the attack. 1 in 55 people in the UK is believed to have tested positive for coronavirus last week. That's more than 1.2 million people. The Office for National Statistics says figures show a similar levels of infection to the previous week, but there are signs that the number of cases could be flattening out. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, takes a look at the figures.
Are we going to go in the left or the right arm, sir?
As people come forward for booster jabs here in Marlow in Buckinghamshire, and here at St Helens Rugby League ground, the hope is that the spread of the virus can be slowed down. There are very tentative views among expert modellers that there may be a downward trend for infections.
It's very possible that cases may continue to go down over the next few weeks, but I'm also very aware that we saw this in September and then we did see a climb in cases again. So I'm probably not confident enough yet to say that this is definitively what we're going to see, but if we continue to see this over the next couple of weeks, then I would be increasingly confident that this wave is turning over.
It's hard to read the data. The daily reported case numbers which cover people who've come forward for testing have been falling week on week. But an infection survey by the Office for National Statistics is based on household testing and includes those who don't have symptoms. It paints a broader picture. The latest ONS survey suggests that last week nearly 1.27 million people in the UK had the virus, about the same as the previous week. And the trend does appear to be flattening after increases recently. In England, 1 in 50 people had the virus. In Wales, it was 1 in 40, and Scotland, 1 in 80. Northern Ireland, with 1 in 65, was the only one to show an increase. But school half-term in some parts of the UK last week may have complicated the situation.
Half-term can have had a positive impact in that it may have paused some of those classroom transmissions that we were seeing happening very frequently through September and October. Of course, what we don't know yet if that will be a long-lasting effect or that now the kids are back at school, we'll start to see those infections pick up again.
While vaccinations continue, there's more optimism about COVID treatments. In trials, a pill developed by Pfizer greatly reduced the risk of getting seriously ill amongst the most vulnerable. It'll now be assessed by regulators. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were just over 34,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That's around 9,000 fewer cases than last Friday. It means an average of nearly 38,000 cases were reported per day in the last week. Just over 9,000 people were in hospital with COVID yesterday. There were 193 deaths. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, which takes the average number of deaths over the past 7 days to 171. The total number of people who've died with COVID now stands at 141,588. On vaccinations, just over 87% of people aged 12 and over have now received a first dose, and 79.6% have been double jabbed. More than 9.3 million people have received their booster jab. This includes third doses for those with certain health conditions. The trial of 3 men accused of murdering a black man while he was out jogging has begun today in the US state of Georgia. The death in February last year of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery sparked protests across the US. Further controversy has followed after a nearly all-white jury was selected for the trial, in which the defendants have pleaded not guilty. Our North America correspondent Ali Maqbool reports now from Georgia.
As the trial opened, video of Ahmaud Arbery's final moments was played. All too much for his mother, who let out a cry. Sitting in front of her in the foreground here, the man who pulled the trigger. This was the video they were watching. 3 armed white men had pursued Ahmaud, saying he resembled a burglary suspect. They cornered him and shot and killed him. Ahmaud Arbery, an avid runner, had been jogging through this area just a short distance from his own home when the men decided to jump into their trucks and give chase. Their own statements show one of the men involved in the killing of this 25-year-old used a racial slur as he lay dying. Well, sadly, murals of unarmed black men who've been shot and killed are now dotted in towns and cities right across this country. But in Ahmaud Arbery's case, he didn't die at the hands of the police, but at the hands of people who believed they could act as an extension of law enforcement and do what they like. And that, after his death, appears to be precisely how the police treated them.
That's fine. That's fine.
There's body cam footage that's too distressing to show, where we see Ahmaud Arbery writhing on the ground, dying, not being given attention. Throughout the encounter, police provide comfort to the men who killed
What you
him.
need to do, man. I can only imagine.
They certainly don't appear to be treated as murder suspects.
Y'all don't put him in cuffs, are you?
No. Why would he be in cuffs?
Well,
In fact, it was only 10 weeks later, after protests, when the video of the killing taken by one of the men went viral, that Travis McMichael, his father Greg, and Roddy Bryan were even arrested. They were charged and are now on trial.
You can intentionally and deliberately kill another person in self-defense and not have committed murder. You would be not guilty.
And it's still self-defense if they chased him?
That's because they were attempting to execute a citizen's arrest.
Ahmaud's case has already led to the scrapping of a Civil War-era citizen's arrest law in Georgia. Before the trial started, his mother told me she hoped somehow good would come out of this tragedy.
I hope that in losing Ahmaud, that people that look like Ahmaud will be able to jog, they will be able to run, they would be able to do whatever and be free, and not to be worried about being chased with guns and killed.
So as you can see,
For the trial, taking place in a city that's majority black, there will be only one African-American juror. And here it appears easier to overturn laws than to change the attitudes that undoubtedly contributed to Ahmaud's death. Liam McBall, BBC News, Brunswick, Georgia.
The Hollyoaks actor Sarah Jane Dunn has said she's shocked and disappointed after being dropped from the TV soap for refusing to remove photos from an adult website. OnlyFans is known for selling explicit adult material, with individuals choosing what they share with subscribers. Channel 4 said they had a responsibility to the TV drama's young viewers, as Lizo Mazimba reports.
Sarah Jane Dunn's Mandy has been a regular face on Hollyoaks
Clearing the deck.
for much of the last 25 years. But she has now been asked to leave the Channel 4 soap because last month she began posting on OnlyFans, a highly successful subscription site for over 18s, where individuals sell images or videos to paying subscribers. The site is best known for its explicit adult content. It can be extremely lucrative.
It's not just about financial motives at all, but obviously it's a factor. I'd be lying if I said that money wasn't part of this, but actually it's very much about the empowerment and taking control over my choices, my body, my decision.
She insists that the images she posts are non-explicit, the kind of pictures she previously would have posted on her Instagram. Lime Pictures, the company that makes Hollyoaks, said we take our responsibility to our young audience very seriously, and therefore the show does not allow any Hollyoaks cast members to be active on certain 18+ websites.
In itself, that actually sounds like this is kind of pro-feminist.
Cultural commentator Dr. Katie Edwards believes that whatever the style of OnlyFans pictures, they still have a negative effect.
For young people to see, the way that people can get attention and the way that people can get status and the way that, women in particular can get economic freedom is through showing the bodies in whatever way. I think that in itself is really troubling.
Sites like OnlyFans are growing fast, with more and more creators like Sarah Jane Dunn. Whether damaging or empowering, this kind of content is here to stay. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
And finally, remember Jackie Weaver and that infamous parish council meeting that hit the headlines? Well, it has happened again, this time at a council meeting in Essex. Police had to be called after it descended into chaos last night. It was sparked by a councillor who's at the centre of a row over bringing the council into disrepute.
Point of order. Councillor Morris, your behaviour is unacceptable. Point of order. Point of order. Your behaviour is unacceptable because you're supposed to listen to a point of order. No, I won't cease this behaviour. You have no authority on me. You have no authority over me, do you, Mark?
Chrissy Morris, an independent councillor in Malden, repeatedly denied claims he'd disclosed confidential information as well as accusations of bullying behaviour. But councillors voted to ban him from meetings for 18 months.
I would ask you to rise and walk out in protest, and I will close the meeting. Point of order. Point of order. Meeting is closed.
Couldn't take a point of order again, eh?
One way to end a council meeting, and that is the end from us for tonight. Newsnight is getting underway over on BBC Two, now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Good night.